Welcome to Chapter 1, The History of Early Childhood Education. I'm going to do this PowerPoint in two different parts. This actually will help you with all of your tests, your exams. It'll also help with your discussion posts. So hopefully you'll learn some interesting facts about the history of early childhood education. So happy to have you here. I just wanted to go over kind of what does ECE, early childhood education, mean. So it's kind of like a group setting deliberately intended to affect developmental changes in children from birth to age 8. So when you hear early childhood education, of course you probably think of preschool. This is, kind of a education where not one way to educate is agreed upon on every, term. So we're going to kind of go over the different theorists, what they believe, how children should be taught, how they learn. So there's going to be some great talk about that. We also are going to learn about the building block year. So many people think 0 to 8 is a great time because that's when children learn. Their mind is just open to learning. They learn how to, crawl when they're babies, walk, talk, establish an identity. You know how when they're little toddlers, they like me do it. So they're learning about their own identity, what they can do. They learn about reading, writing, print, math concepts, and they learn to count. So these are very important and formative years for children. And so I just want to touch on to some world influences, which we got a lot from Greece and Rome that we will be talking about. So many of our own education practices are founded on these developmental ideas from Greece and Rome, okay? In the very beginning, they really wanted children to grow up quick. So they're considered an adult by age 7. This is way back in the day. Education began and they taught kids around 6 or 7, mostly for upper class males. Girls pretty much were taught about domestic work and trade. But as time went on, these world influences started to take a little bit more of a learning approach for children. So in the Middle and Dark Ages, the church actually controlled schools around this time. So the church, they believed that children learn, first mostly by their parents. They were also encouraged to move into adulthood pretty fast also at this time. They try to prepare the children, for afterlife. So we'll start talking a little bit more about these influences a little bit deeper as we go. So in the Renaissance and the Reformation time period, there was a more humanistic approach to education for children. So by the 1500s, schools taught subjects such as reading, writing, arithmetic, and bookkeeping, which were like fairly common throughout Europe. So they really did like a universal education. And literacy, teaching children kind of a more social and also about reading and writing. So German schools began for all children. So they were kind of the first to start. Then you come to modern times and you have Comenius, who wrote actually the first picture book for children. And this picture book was called Orbis Pictus. And he really advocated for the approach of learning based on the principles of nature, and that children should be allowed kind of to learn at their own pace. So he's really talking about school readiness for kids. Then Locke came and theorized the concept of the tabula rasa, which some of you probably heard before if you took child development classes. But this concept was the belief that a child is born neutral, or they have a clean slate, and that parents, society, education, and the world will be writing on basically their blank slate. So they'll learn from that parents, environment, education around them. And then Rousseau, also in the 1700s, he was actually a Swiss writer and philosopher. And he proposed that children were naturally good. He wrote a book called Emile in 1760, in which he raised a hypothetical child all the way till adulthood. So in that book, he believed that children's mind develops in distinct phases, and teachers should adjust their instruction accordingly. So he's really talking almost like a child-centered, learning, teaching about what children already know and building on it. So what do you think about that? Do you think children's mind develop in like phases that have distinct orders? Some theorists do believe that. So it's just interesting thought. And Pestalozzi, he came and he also used nature as a study of part of the curriculum in learning, and believed that a good education meant the development of these senses, really learning about nature, developing all the senses that kids have. They learn more by doing, which is, I absolutely agree. Definitely hands-on learning is the best. And then Froebel, he is known actually of the person who created the word kindergarten. So he's the father of kindergarten, and it's a German word which means children's garden. And that is what Froebel's best known for. He wanted this place to be for children under 6 years of age. He created this best really because of his own childhood, which was unhappy. And he resolved that, early education was extremely important for children to learn, to grow, and to have the best experience. Yes, they're growing up 0 to 5, 0 to 6. And then Montessori came. Many of you probably heard of the theorist Maria Montessori. And actually, she became the first physician. So she was the first woman doctor in Italy. And she became really, really motivated and aspired to open a preschool for ages 2 to 5. And she did that with about 50 children. And during this time, she believed that children passed through like a sensitive period in which their curiosity makes that, their curiosity is heightened, they're ready to learn, inquiring skills and knowledge. So she really, again, believed in like tactile, touching, having kids do hands-on learning. She believed in open-air preschool, which means that, they play outdoors a lot. They learn. The environment's set up in a way to help encourage that learning. And then Steiner was an Australian philosopher and artist. He was also a scientist, and he created the Waldorf School. Some of you may have heard that. So this system has influenced basically mainstream education in Europe and also here in America today. So Steiner theorized that children And childhood is a phase of life that is important in its own right, and that the environment must be carefully planned to protect the nature of the child. He emphasized that children's spiritual development, imagination, and then help create the gifts that they already have, and for them to use art, nurture the child where they're at. Again, have the environment planned out, kind of like Montessori believes. And beyond that, European perspective, there's many different cultures' perspective also. So on pages 16 and 17, you'll read all about different perspectives and how children should be developed, taught, and educated. So you can look at those different types. And then again, we'll kind of hit on American influences. So there's the colonial period, the Puritan influences. They really started the first schooling. They had like Bible study for boys, mostly for boys at that time. They believed that also at this time, Thomas Jefferson believed that knowledge should be available to all, but that opinion was not widely shared all throughout America. So northern states really believed in the universal, basically, school. Southern believed a little bit more upper class kids could get, schooling. And children, African American children also in the North were actually freed at this time and the Revolutionary War, but were not educated. So even though they were free, they were not educated. They were not allowed to really go to school. And then in the South, they forbid education to the slaves. So after Civil War, the private and public education was available, but it definitely, even though it was available, it wasn't on a level plane. It was not equal. So even though it was separate, African American school, the white school, it definitely was not equal, even though they were given education. So a long history about that comes. And it's a progressive more education. So now it's kind of like a more, like I said, child-centered approach. So we recognize individual needs and individual differences in children, how they're taught, how they're learned. So teachers must be more attentive to the needs of children than to the academics alone. So as a teacher, I do believe that we really need to really look at the child, see how they're doing, ask them how they're doing, get more attentive to their needs, not just their academics alone or what they're learning. So again, children learn best when they are highly motivated, have a general intent and interest in the material. So we want to motivate them, right? Get them interested in the material. Teaching is not an easy job. It takes a lot of skill. Years after years, you learn a lot from kids, how they're motivated. Again, as the years pass and education's progressing, which is great, teachers should be aware of the child's total development. Their social, their physical, intellectual, and emotional, right? So we're going to look a little bit into the second part of this chapter. So hopefully this part has been good for you, part 1. We're going to finish part 2. And make sure you really listen to this, and this will be helpful again for your exams and on your discussions. Take care. Bye.